we'll go ahead and get rolling here. So, and hopefully Julie will be able to join us here pretty soon. So she is a land manager, so things don't always go as planned. And her office is about a mile from the border of the property. So I have no idea where she's coming back from, but she just texted me and said it might be closer to 2:30, which is fine because I have kind of a contingency plan for us until she gets here. So first things first, I'm gonna share my screen and we will look at Blackboard. I just want to make a point of clarification that Emily pointed out to me today. Thank you, Emily. Let's see, let's do. Oh, that's not the one I wanted. Hang on. Too many screens. There we go. All right. So as far as weekly content, guys, I went over this on Monday as well, but no official new like lecture videos and stuff to watch this week or a quiz to take. Instead, we are learning about Medusa Head through a management guide that was put together by cooperators here in California, as well as one collaborator from Eastern Oregon. And so that is that Medusa Head management guide, and it's linked here. We're going to look at it in just a second. The point of clarification is that I went in and I edited this assignment just a couple hours ago. So I had chose the incorrect assignment, which had one question at the very end of it that was that pertained to last year's grazing management plan. And so here's the take-home message. If you have already downloaded that Word document with the questions and stuff on it, you can keep using it. Just don't do the last question if it was really long and mentions the Daughtry management unit. Okay. However, if you downloaded it today or through the end of the week, you can use this clean version here that doesn't have that question on it. So that's just one point of clarification for today. So we aren't getting too super confused, and I apologize about that. So, all right. Any other questions about class stuff, what's due this week, where we're headed? And it could even be questions about previous material. We've got a few minutes to burn here as Julie gets to her office and into our room, our Zoom room. And so I just want to be able to offer this time for questions that you guys may have or issues you may want to discuss. And if not, that's okay. Because I want to talk a little bit about Medusa Head in a little bit too. So talk to me. What's going on? How is everyone doing? What questions do you have? Emily looks super enthused right now. Oh, excellent. Okay, I think Julie's coming in, so you guys are saved, okay? I'm not going to throw questions at you, so let's see if this is her. Awesome. Julie, is that you?
Can you hear me?
We can. How are you?
Okay. Good. How are you?
Good, 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 good.
Let's see. I don't know if my camera works on this. Let's look. Oh, there it is. Hello.
Hello. So Julie, Alan, this is the class. This is our Animal Science 394 class. And so this is a class, I think that started probably a year after you graduated, sorry.
Okay.
And so you and I have talked a little bit about kind of what you need for the property. And first of all, thank you so much for being here and for allowing us to like use the swamp as a case study for the class. So
No problem.
yeah, it always works better when you're like doing something for a cause and not just a grade, right?
Yes,
Yes,
definitely.
absolutely. Okay, cool. Well, so Julie, I have the Word document that you sent me last night, and then I have this PowerPoint Google Slides set. So I can drop those into the chat, or I can share my screen, or I can just let you share your screen. So you tell me what.
Probably share your screen
Okay.
because I've got all kinds of stuff up here right now. Yeah, that's what I would do. If you
Okay.
could share your screen, that might be better.
Okay. Do you want to start with, actually, before we go to that, why don't you just give these guys just a little bit of your story and your background?
Okay. My name is Julie Allen. I am a Chico State alumni, graduated there in 2016. After that, I came up to Fall River in, I want to say the end of 2017, started 2018, started working as the range manager out here for the Fall River RCD. So the Fall River RCD acquired the swamp in October of 2017. So it's a pretty new property to us and the position's pretty new. So I've been managing that for, this is my 4th year. It's a big property. There's a lot to it. There's a lot, it's not just a private landowner who owns a piece of property that can go do whatever they want with it. We're held by a lot of easements and leases that kind of guide us in what we can and cannot do with the property. But along with that, we have a grazing lease. It's a long-term grazing lease with a association up here, McArthur Range Management Association. So they are our grazing lease holders out there, and they've been there since, oh shoot, Casey, I don't even know, the 80s, beyond that. I mean,
Yeah.
50s. I mean, they've been out there forever.
Forever.
So with the property, we got the grazing lease. That was one of the stipulations of taking on the property, was maintaining the grazers that came with it, because as I said, these grazers have been out there for, I think, most of their lives. So this property is really important to them as far as just their livelihoods. So with that, that's kind of our biggest, our main focus is maintaining the grazing and also improving it. The swamp has a lot of issues with invasive species. And I think there's a list Casey has, and basically every weed known to man is out there somewhere on this property.
There's a lot of thistles too. I actually listed them out in the Google slide set. So there's some weeds, that's for sure.
So our main focus right now, because we are in RCD, we're pretty limited in funding. We mainly get grant funding, either state or federal, but those funds are tied to a project. So as far as income on our own, really the only income that we have is from the grazers. And since that is such an important aspect to this community, that's something that we want to maintain and improve as much as possible. So I guess my, what I need the most help with is getting some ideas outside of what I've come up with on my own of ways to kind of tackle some of the invasive species out there in a low cost but sustainable way. And preferably, if we can use grazing management to do that. That's the best case scenario. To kind of restore the swamp back to, I hate to say native rangelands because that used to be underwater. So, but to more native species and less invasive species, and then to improve our grazing out there. I guess that would be
Cool. So Julie, do you mind just talking a little bit about what RCD stands for? And we have really talked about land ownership from either a private aspect or a public aspect. And so it's, you know, these guys are pretty familiar with Forest Service, BLM, Park Service
right.
Type ownership. And then there's, you know, private ownership, but can you talk a little bit about what RCD is?
So the RCD stands for Resource Conservation District. I couldn't tell you how many RCDs throughout the state of California, but there's several. We have another one just over the hill. It's the Pitt RCD. So RCDs function as a nonprofit organization where they try to help the community with certain projects that there's not really anyone to take the lead on. So for instance, fields reduction projects, stream bank restoration projects, things like that, things that need to be done, but there's not really anyone to take the lead and they don't really have the funding to do that. So that's how RCDs kind of function. Our RCD is a little different because we do actually own property. So as a property owner, it is our property. However, being an RCD and with the swamp specifically, it is public use. So it is private property, but it is supposed to be available for public use. So we still are able to make decisions on how we want to spend our money on the property and what we want to do with it and what type of public use we're willing to allow, but it isn't purely private property where we can put up, you know, fences and gates and keep everybody out.
Yeah.
I don't know, did I cover that?
Yeah, it's one of those situations that's in a really big gray area, which can be awesome because you can have way more leeway in certain areas, but it can also be a bear when it comes to management, right? And
I think with it being set up the way that it is, it's actually more difficult because we're bound to our conservation easement. We're bound to this grazing license. We're also bound to PG&E easements and licenses that really kind of restrict us from doing certain things. And it also, just being an RCD, there's all these steps you have to go through before you want to do something. So it just slows the process down. If we wanted to go out there and rip up a bunch of ground, say to put in rice fields, a private landowner could just say, hey, I want to go do this. As an RCD, we can't. We have to go through cultural resources first, then we have to go through the state CEQA process. And we have to go through all of our easements and make sure that we're not doing anything against those easements. And we have to basically go through a checklist before we're able to go out on the ground and start a project.
Yeah, cool. Yeah, complex from a management.
Very complex.
Yeah,
a lot of moving parts.
Awesome. Okay, so guys, Julie probably would love some questions at some point too, and she's fairly easygoing. So if you guys have questions about certain aspects, I think for the sake of us garnering as much information as possible for the grazing management plan, either speak up or raise your hand with the little reaction button and I'll keep an eye on stuff. But we'd love for you to ask questions when we're talking about stuff rather than waiting till the end, okay? It's just easier to make connections that way. So.
Yeah, how many students do you have in this class?
We've
Showing a few of you guys.
got 20, we've got 19 here with us today. There's 24 in the class.
So did they get that document I typed up? Have they been able to look at that? Okay.
Nope, but I can upload it into the chat right now and they can look at it.
If I could put the map behind me so they can actually get an idea of what the property looks like.
Oh, maybe I can. Oh my goodness. Yeah, this is a great write-up.
Does anybody have any questions so far that I could answer or clear up or?
Somebody should ask Julie what her biggest achievement at Chico State was.
Oh, geez.
Come on, you know what the one that I'm worried about.
I know. Making it to class.
No. Weren't you on some sort of like
Yes.
winning team?
So I was on Casey's animal science AQ team.
Yeah, quadrathlon.
We won nationals, so that was exciting.
Yeah.
We were the first ones to do it, weren't we?
You were, yeah.
Woo.
Who did you beat? Do you remember?
It was Texas A&M, Purdue, and what's the other one?
Penn State.
Penn State. Was it Penn State? No, I don't think it was.
Or was it Connecticut?
Texas A&M, Purdue. Who was the other one? It was one that, I mean, they were probably surprised to see us there too, but I remember thinking, I never thought of them as an animal science college, but
Yeah.
who was that last? I don't remember. It'll come to me.
We'll think of it.
We're talking about grass.
Awesome. Okay, so I think I've got this kind of figured out. My goodness. Come on, Casey. Let me add a file. Oh my gosh, come on.
Does Rhode Island sound right?
Maybe.
sound right.
I don't.
Might
I'll
be
have to
Rhode
look
Island.
back. Some Ivy League school is what it was.
Yeah.
But most importantly, Texas Tech.
Yeah.
No, Texas A&M.
Texas A&M. That's who it was. Beat out Texas A&M. I was pretty proud of that one.
We were too. Oh, is currently in use. Gosh dang.
I have no idea how to really use them because I play outside.
I think I got it. Okay. All right, guys. Do you see an attachment pop up in the chat? Okay, awesome. So do you want me to I can bring it up here, Julie, if you want, or I can switch over to the slideshow, whatever you think.
I don't know. What do you want to start with? I mean, I could go through, I guess let's talk about the property a little bit.
Okay.
I could start talking about that. And then if you want to pull up your slides, they can start seeing the maps.
Okay.
So the swamp property is approximately 4,500 acres. So I think it comes in right at 4,491 acres. So it's a really big property kind of in the center of the valley.
Yep.
It's broken up by some drainage canals and some access roads. So the property used to be owned by PG&E, and through their bankruptcy settlement, they had to basically donate a certain amount of property for public use, and that's how we ended up with the swamp. However, they did retain parts of the swamp. So they do have some public boat launch areas out there, and that's what those access roads really go to, but they kind of cut the RC property into sections. So there's 3 sections. We refer to them as the S fields, the north fields, or the east fields. And then they're all kind of designated their own little numbers. So for instance, there's 5 S fields, S1, S1, S2, S3, S4, S5. There's 4 N fields, and there are 4 east fields. So altogether, there's 13 fields. They range anywhere from about 70 acres in size to 747 acres in size. And the cattle rotate throughout the fields, kind of based on what vegetation is in them. So the lower fields tend to have, the S fields, south fields tend to have more annual grasses. And the northern fields have more perennial grasses. So the cattle kind of move through the annual fields in the springtime, and they'll go up to the fields with the perennial grasses during the bulk of the summer, and then during the fall we'll start to work them back down to those fields for that dry feed that's left behind.
So Julie, I can't work my computer very well. Are you looking at a map with red,
yes,
the red border? Okay, cool.
Yeah.
So,
and actually on this, the east side of the map, we do actually have one more field in
right
there. Yeah, it's that one right there.
Yeah.
So can you see my mouse moving, or is it just yours?
It's just mine, I think.
Okay.
So, yeah. So just to give you guys a little bit of background, so you kind of saw where this property was at in northeastern California, right? So here's Redding, here's Chico, this is McArthur. This is why it takes me 2.5 hours to get to Chico, right? So, and this property is just basically north of, or northeast-ish of the little itty bitty town of McArthur. And so it's a little bit harder to see. If I had pulled a better Google Earth image, this area up here at the top, this is actually all kind of old lava flow areas. And so that we've also got a fault line, and Julie, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think that we've got this old fault line that runs along here. And that's why we have exposure of natural springs that filled this lake. And so this lake is called Big Lake. And so that is one of the, or part of the border of the swamp. And this is really why PG&E came in and bought the property originally from the McArthur family.
Right.
And so back in the 1800s, do you know what year it was actually drained, Julie?
I want to say it was like, it was a long time ago.
Like late or early 1900s, right? Like 1910 or something.
It was like 1907 or something. I don't know.
Yeah.
Early 1900s.
Yeah. So all of this area was actually underwater.
Right.
And so the McArthur family put in a canal, and the canal is like right along here, and connected the Big Lake to the Pitt River. And so this is the Pitt River right here that sits underneath this bluff. And they did that for a lot of reasons, but irrigation was a big one. And so it drained a lot of this area. And so if you guys remember when we talked about the first couple of weeks, the geology of California and how the Central Valley was once a lake, right? And all that sediment built up in the bottom. And that's why we have class 1 really highly fertile soils. You can see from all the hay ground around this area that that is what we've got going on here as well. We've got really fertile soils. We up in this neck of the woods, we grow a lot of hay, and we grow a lot of test hay for dairies. And so this ground is actually fairly fertile. But what we run into is right here in the center of it, it sets at a little bit higher elevation than some of the areas that are closer to the lake. And I mean, like within feet, it's not hills, there's no topography to it. And so you'll see we've got some soil maps and stuff too, but even just within the 5,000 acres, the soil is pretty diverse just within the area.
Yeah. And then another thing about this property too, and you can't really see it so much on this map you're looking at right now, but so there's the main north-south drainage canal that Casey pointed out, and then there's this east-west drainage canal that actually ties into the Tule River on the east side of the property.
This one.
But yeah, but throughout the fields, you can kind of see it in this N4 field. All those vertical north-south lines are actual drainage lines, so that any surface water from this property eventually drains into one of these two canals, waterways. And that was put in back when they drained this property. And I was told that they drained this property for irrigation for one, but also so that they could farm this property.
Yeah.
Well.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of drainage system within it. So you get a lot of seasonal flooding in some areas, but most of the time, this swamp is actually fairly dry because the water is set to drain off.
So I think this is just a site map. So the red borders here are the
Property boundaries.
property boundaries. So it's hard. This is where we get into hard ownership stuff, right? So this is a canal, and this is a canal that was put in and runs water year round. And next to it are roads. And so again, the access roads become one of those areas of management issues as well. So, but this is the over here E4. This is the pasture that I didn't have originally outlined on that first map. So cool.
So with this property, as I said, it came with a grazing lease with it. There's about 9 members in the grazing association, and between them at full numbers, they can run approximately 1,440 cattle on that property over a 6-month period. So it actually has pretty good carrying capacity to it. But primarily that's all coming from those north fields and a couple of those east fields you see, because that's reed canary grass.
Yeah.
That's the perennial summer feed that I talk about when I say that they spend the bulk of their time on the perennial feed. It's reed canary grass, and that does really well in wet, hot, mucky soils, and that's what that is, because that prior to being drained was all underwater, and that's all lake bed soil. So it's very fertile. The feed does great up there. Yeah. But it's pretty limited to the property.
Yeah. So here's the different soil types that we're looking at. And these types, 274, 276, these are going to continue over in this area that isn't necessarily outlined here. But these, you can almost see just how the different lava flows over, millennia have really created different types of soil. So this is very different soil over here in these north pastures compared to the south pastures here.
So the farther south you move on the swamps, but the higher in topography, the more alkaline soil you get. Yeah. So the lower elevation soils is the pastola muck, which we call that just peat soil. And then the farther, so the higher in elevation you go, or the farther south on the property, you start seeing the 160 to 328. That's actually kind of more clay-like soils. So in the springtime, if there's any water out there, it's really slick, slippery soil. But in the summer, when it's dry, it's essentially just a hard pan.
And does it crack? Because it does. Yeah, during the summer when it gets dry, it cracks.
And even the muck soil, the 274, 275, this year, the first time I saw it, but that stuff actually started cracking too. So
Oh,
that's
fantastic.
just how dry it is this year. But so when you get into these more alkaline soils is where you start to get into more of the annual grasses. And that's where we start to see the problems with the invasive species like the cheatgrass, the Medusa head, is when you get into that more alkaline, more saline soil, that kind of hard pan. That's where we get a lot of the invasive species. But as you can see, that's a really big chunk of the property.
Yeah. A big chunk, like hundreds of acres.
Yeah, I think it's actually
Probably 1,000, huh? At least.
over. Yeah, I think it's like 1,500 acres of invasive species cover over a 4,000 acre property.
Yeah.
And that's largely due to, I mean, if you start looking at the soils and the water and your species, it's all intertwined. It all has to do with the soil that's there, and that's why those invasive species are able to do so well. Unfortunately, that's a really large area of the property, and I don't know how familiar you guys are with cheatgrass or Medusa head, but they just flourish, and they are, once they take hold, they are really hard to stay on top of, and they outcompete your native species. They outcompete, I mean, even if you try doing some seeding and you don't get rid of that stuff prior to it, I mean, they're just so competitive that once they get a foothold somewhere, I mean, it's a losing battle trying to manage that. And that's kind of the problem that we're at today, is we have a lot of acres that have a lot of invasive species cover, and it's how do we try to get that back? What management methods can I use with a low budget, with I'm the only person out there, to try to combat that and get some sort of native species be able to take hold again. So that is where you guys are going to come in and help me out, hopefully.
Awesome. Well, they are doing an assignment this week where they've been given a Medusa head management guide that was put together by folks in California that have a lot of experience on annual grasslands, and then one person from Eastern Oregon from the Burns Research Station. And so it's a really good management system that is going to work both, or has solutions for sagebrush, steppe country, and annual grasslands. And so that's one thing that Julie can probably speak a little bit more to, but this area of California, we call this the Intermountain area. And so we're surrounded by mountains all the way around us, and then we're a valley in the center. And so when we think about that from a historical perspective, that's why we have really good soil, right? Because we've had volcanic eruptions, we've had lots of stuff settle into the valleys, we've got really good topsoil. And so the problem with that is that this whole area is at roughly 3,200 to 3,300 feet in elevation. So we aren't a true annual grassland like the Central Valley where Chico's at. And we aren't true sagebrush steppe like just over the mountain range from where this town is at. And so we're in one of those areas where we see a combination of ecosystems coming together. And so it's really cool because it usually provides a lot of diverse plant life and soil life. And with that comes really diverse wildlife species. But it is a bear to manage because you have to manage, annual grasses and perennial grasses in the same area. And that is where we see a lot of issues pop up, especially the invasion issue of Medusa head and cheatgrass. So.
And the thing about this area too is we are California, but we're Northern California. So our seasons are a little different than your Central California. So I know a lot of the stuff that I've researched as far as Medusa head management are all pretty well based in Central California, but you can't necessarily use those management practices here because our seasons are different. We have longer winters. The seed time from when Medusa head starts really picking up to what it does in the Central Valley, it's a totally different time frame. And then when you've got your native species up here trying to compete against those, it just kind of complicates everything a little bit. And there have been some studies done of how to target it in this area, but I haven't done a whole lot of research into that. It's just, that's one thing to keep in mind is you can read a lot of stuff about the Central Valley and how they targeted Medusa head, but that doesn't necessarily apply to here because our seasons are different and when it starts to pick up and when it starts to kind of take over is a different time frame than in the Central Valley.
Yep. So, so here's kind of plant community, general plant community. And so Julie, I took this out of the management guide. And so they split it up into like different, almost ecotones. And so, which is cool because then they went through, I think they went through and categorized the different plants that we would see in each ecotone. And so that part is going to be really cool to kind of look into. But if we just take sagebrush upland, let me go back here. So sagebrush upland is going to be this brown color, and it's going to be down here on the south side and over here on the east side. And so this is, and you can see sagebrush from the road, so I know it's there.
Yeah, it's pretty limited to the property, but
it is. But so Julie, in those within or in between those sagebrush plants, what type of grass do you see in there in those areas?
Oh, so that's the higher, drier areas. So that's more the alkaline soil. So you're gonna see a lot of Medusa head, a lot of cheatgrass, jointed goat grass. You're gonna get some of your bluegrasses. So your bulbous bluegrass, I know is pretty prominent in the spring. Some bromes. Primarily all non-native annual grasses is what you're gonna find there.
Okay. So this intermediate grassland area, this is in the mesic grasslands. This is where we see big acreage, right? With big infestation of Medusa head.
Right.
So so this is probably an area that we'll concentrate a little bit on. And then if I can find a map, I know that there's one right there. So this has the fence lines in it too. So we are dealing with a couple of different pastures that have the Medusa head invasion as well. And so this map is interesting because, so Julie, it says the blue dots are water troughs. Are those existing troughs? I think they are, right? They're not.
Yes, those are existing.
Okay, cool. Because there was another suggested one of where you could develop water, and I am hoping that I didn't put that in here. So, but okay, cool. So our goal for you is to try to figure out how to reduce Medusa head in the cheapest way possible so that we can increase AUMs in these areas, correct?
Correct.
Okay, cool.
Yeah.
Cool.
And with this map, so the red, what you guys are looking at, the red is high concentrations of Medusa head, and then the green is supposed to be low to no concentration, the dark green. However, That's not completely accurate. I mean, the red is definitely where we have high concentrations, but realistically in these S fields, the whole S section should be a yellow color. I mean,
Yeah.
they just tried to do the really high concentrations, but I don't want you guys looking at this dark green in these S fields thinking that there's no Medusa head present there. It's there. It's just not, you know, the red in the S4 field is, I mean, that's probably 90% Medusa head. So when you're comparing that to just to the other side of that where it shows green, I don't want you guys looking at that thinking that it's not there. That whole S section should be basically yellow. And that's how much it's overtaken in that property.
Cool. So we're talking a lot about Medusa head, but like Julie mentioned earlier, there's a lot of invasive species out there. And so these were the ones that were in the management plan. And I can absolutely attest to some of these thistles, especially that stinking Scotch thistle. Oh my gosh.
Yeah, so what we've done is perennial pepperweed has kind of been our main focus as far as spraying for noxious weeds, because it kind of grows in clusters and you can target that really well. We haven't done any spraying for, let's see, cheatgrass, jointed goat grass, yellow star thistle. Well, that's not completely true. If it's in with other stuff, we'll hit it at the same time. Medusa head or white top. And the reason that we haven't done any spraying for those invasive species is because they're so widespread that you would have to spray essentially the entire property to cover it. And that'll never happen. You would never be able to afford that. We're trying to target the ones that we can get that grow in clusters and try to knock them out completely, rather than focusing on, say, one field, but then just right over the fence line, you're going to have Medusa head growing. So everything that you just sprayed is just going to be reseeded again. So as far as spraying noxious weeds go, we try to hit the things that we know we can hit the whole group and try to knock that out. So that's the kind of the more of the things that bunch together that you can hit at one time. White top, Medusa head, cheatgrass, that's so widespread that you would just have to spray the entire property to try to make any sort of dent.
Awesome. Okay, so just so I'm clear, we're gonna really concentrate on this area.
Yep.
Okay, and the reason we're not concentrating on this heat map back here is because this pasture is part of the property, but that one's a PG&E one, right?
No, that is ours.
Oh, that is yours. Okay.
The reason we're not so much focusing on that one right now is because that has potential to be turned into farm ground and or visitor center type. So that has maybe some other plans to it, but the S fields are going to remain grazing land because you really can't do much else with those. So if we want to improve our grazing, we want to do it with the section that we know isn't going to later be turned into farming ground or have a different use later down the road.
Cool. All right, let's see what other fun things I put in here. So these were pictures that I took a year ago, a little less than a year ago, by about 3 weeks. So when we gathered for Uncle Tim. And so this is coming down that angle fence on
looks like it's between an S3 and S5.
4
and 2.
Yeah, 2 and 4. Yeah.
Okay.
I rode a long damn way. So yeah, and so that's where that picture was taken. And this was the middle of November, guys. If it looks cold, it was because I didn't put it in here, but I was on my trusty steed and I had 2 sweatshirts on, a big coat and a wild rag and 2 caps on, and it was cold. It was probably 15 to 20 degrees on the day that we decided together, which is pretty normal for our operation. Wait till that's the worst part of the year and then do it. And so you can see that there's lots of grazing activity happening here. So we see quite a few bunches of what was Medusa head, but the tops are pretty gone. And they almost look like they were uniformly bit. And so that is a really good indication that you've got grazing activity happening. You can also kind of see how dark these soils are in this part of the pasture. So this is a cow trail here. We had no rain up to this point, so it's not really being filtered out by too much moisture. But this is what the landscape looks like. So the good news and the bad news both is that it is flat, right? So flat, flat, flat. And so that is cool because we don't have to worry about topography and cattle really preferring to graze on certain parts of an aspect or something like that. So everything has the potential to be uniformly grazed, as long as it's the vegetation there is pretty desirable. So that's the good news. Julie put in these exclosures this year, right?
Yeah, I don't know, spring.
Yeah. Spring. So this was, I took these pictures, Julie, when we were out doctoring for Tim in June. And so you can, this is that, what pasture would have this have been? It's not the Ashfield, it's the other one.
Probably if you were with Tim's cows.
3, right? 3 or 4?
You're in 4, I believe.
Okay.
In 4.
So is that the bridge right there?
Yeah.
Yep. So we're in 4. Okay. So yeah. And so this was looking back towards the south. But you can see this is all that reed canary grass that is growing in that area. And so it looks green. It actually, when it's young like that, and Julie, you can talk to us a little bit more about that. It's actually pretty highly palatable because it's still lush and has a lot of water content in the leaf. But when it gets old and brittle, older, it will turn this yellow color. And the leaves on the grass can get to be like as wide as like 1.5 inches or 2 inches thick. And so and they stand straight up. Like I've been in this stuff and have on a 4-wheeler, and you have to stand up because you can't see cows. And so it has the potential to get really, really tall too.
So if you took this photo in June,
yeah.
So this grass, reed canary grass, we rely on it because it has a lot of AUMs to it. But this grass, you can't keep up with it almost. So typically this grass will look like this height-wise in mid-May.
Mm-hmm.
And then when you get into June, like Casey said, you're standing up on a 4-wheeler to be able to see it. So with it just being as dry as it is this year, what this grass does not like is really, really dry or cold. As soon as it starts to get cold, this grass dies. As soon as it gets dry, the soil loses the moisture, it starts to brown out. So this grass is great. That's about the stage what you see here. The cattle do really well on it, but as soon as it starts to continue to grow and stem out, it gets really coarse and it loses some of its water moisture. So it's not as palatable. They don't want to eat it. You almost have to force them to eat it. And if it's bad enough, it can actually cause sores in the cattle's mouths because of how rough it is.
Yeah.
So this is a feed that you actually want to be grazing it when it looks like it does in this picture. And this year, that's as tall as it got, so that never became a problem. But on a typical year, when you actually have some water moisture, you're actually trying to keep up with it to make sure that the cattle are hitting it at that right time frame.
Yeah.
So this stuff will grow from May to October until it gets cold, and it does not slow down.
Yeah, it's pretty awesome stuff. So, and then, okay, so biggest challenges we kind of covered. So Medusa head management. So that's where we're going to help you, hopefully. And then is there anything else, Julie, that you would like us to take a look at, even if it's not super in depth, but to give you some feedback on, or provide like maybe some alternatives?
I don't know. Maybe if you guys want to look at, well, it's going to be hard to do, but just potential carrying capacities of these fields. You know, what you think the carrying capacity of those S fields actually is currently, even with the Medusa head issue.
Do you have, oh yeah, I was in there. So you have your clippings, right? Are any of those clippings
None
out
of
those fields?
You might, well, the S5 field is the only one I put monitoring cages in,
Okay.
but I didn't do any of those other ones.
We could probably just use those values for the rest of them. So, okay. So if we can get weights from you for this year, because this will be the bottom of your bell curve, right? Because it was a horrible drought year.
Right.
We'll definitely calculate carrying capacities for each of those pastures.
And I could even go in and probably just get some weights of residual dry matter on the fields I haven't let the cows back into yet.
Okay.
And try to avoid the areas where Georgia's water irrigates them, because that will throw a curve.
Okay.
And get you some weights for that.
Cool.
Because I'd be interested to know, you know, the graph that you saw the other day, that's from what, 2001?
Yeah.
So 20 years ago. And I don't think that that's accurate anymore. I'd like to have a better idea of what we actually have available to us.
Yeah. Stocking, I preach this in class all the time. So stocking rate is one of those things that needs to be calculated every year. And in order to do that, you've got to have a really good method in place for collecting samples. And so I know, Julie, you're working on that. You've got your exclosures in, you're doing sample collection and that type of stuff. But I mean, we run into this problem when I consult for Forest Service, as well as like they haven't recalculated stocking rates in 10 years since they did the contract, you know, for the allotments, and stuff changes, especially when you get back into, you know, wildfire or mudslides or that type of stuff. So even if you think the land is static, it's never static. It's always changing.
And drought years are huge too, because that's when those invasive species, for some reason, just thrive.
Yep, they do. They like it. They like it. Okay, cool. So that was good. Thank you for the feedback. So, okay, guys, what kind of questions do you have? Because this is the time that we have Julie.
Buddy?
They're fairly quiet. But if you wait long enough, somebody will speak up. Okay, think faster, Cheyenne.
What did you need help in? You said predation or
Oh, Medusa head invasion.
earlier. earlier. I forget the speaker's name, but she needed help with something.
Oh,
I
yep.
forgot already.
Medusa head invasion. So Medusa head's a winter annual grass that's not native to this area, and it's actually really, well, in the Intermountain area, I know it's a really big issue. In the Central Valley area, it's a really big issue. The thing about Medusa head, and I can talk to you guys a little bit about it because I've actually read a bunch about it, is there's several things about Medusa head that make it such a problem. Some of those being that it is a winter annual, so it kind of starts to pick up when the other grasses are going dormant in the winter. And then in the springtime, you'll get your spring annual grasses that will sense and seed out, late April at the latest. Medusa head, what it does is it doesn't actually go to seed until May. So the other grasses have gone to seed. Medusa head waits to go to seed later, and everything I've read about it says that it does this so that it doesn't have to compete with any resources. So when the other grasses are done their thing and then they go dormant, that's when Medusa head starts to seed out, and it just outcompetes everything at that point because everything else has gone dormant. It stays up longer. That's one of the ways it outcompetes. It also has these seeds that look like they kind of have like a little corkscrew to them, to the awnings of them. So when they get in the soil, they basically just corkscrew down into the soil. So it's able to establish itself better that way. Medusa head is not palatable to livestock or birds or rodents. Really nothing eats it. It has a really high silicone content to it. Silica, I guess is what I should say.
Yep.
So nothing eats it. So what it does is when it goes dormant and it dies, it just lays over and creates a layer of dead grass on top of the soil, which prevents other seeds from being able to penetrate that and get into the soil. And that's part of its corkscrew adaptation, is it can get through its own batch layer, but other annual seeds and even perennial seeds can't get down into the soil. So if they do actually begin to sprout, it's very short-lived because they sprout and then they can't get those resources and they die. Yeah. Also, the amount of seed that it puts out and the amount of time that the seed is viable within the soil, I think, is something ridiculous.
Like
so
as bad as
even-
star thistle, right? Isn't it like
Yeah,
40
so
years?
even if you say you have a bad year where the Medusa head didn't get the moisture it needed to begin to sprout, it doesn't matter. It just stays in dormancy until it gets its right conditions, and then it just explodes. So it's a pretty big problem for a lot of reasons. Those are just a few of them. But it's just adapted itself so well to just outcompete, especially other annual grasses.
Yes.
And it's kind of.
And I know the problem we run into it at the beef unit range property is that it'll grow and germinate, as soon as the soil gets below like 70 degrees Fahrenheit and you have some moisture. And so it will grow, but the cattle prefer the other species. So they prefer the legumes, they prefer the annual grasses that aren't invasive, like some of the grama species and some of the ripgut bromes and those type of things. So the cows will eat those. And if we don't manage through stocking rate, they'll eat a lot of the seed heads off. So those plants won't even have the ability to seed out to put seed in the ground for the following year because they taste good. Right. Yeah. And so
that's the thing about cattle grazing is if the cattle have a choice and you have desirable feed versus non-desirable feed, they will always choose the desirable feed and you will always be left with the non-desirable. So usually that's your invasive species. If they don't have the choice, if you can stock them to where they have to graze what's there, otherwise, they're going to go hungry, then that can kind of help the issue. But we have a 747 acre field out there. You cannot make cattle graze invasive species when you have other species available. They're always going to hit the desirable species. And if they hit them too soon, they won't go to seed. And you're going to have the same issue. And then those invasive species are all going to go to seed because they don't get grazed at all. And you're just proliferating the problem. And then another thing about Medusa head is I think if it has the right conditions, it'll go to seed in the spring. That seed will sprout and go to seed before the end of the year. Mm-hmm. So it's just exponential if you have the right conditions, because it'll go to seed multiple times throughout one season. And Medusa head also depletes the nitrogen in the soil. So it doesn't seem to need much nitrogen in order to do well, but other grasses, especially the ones you want, do. So it's just one of those species that has adapted itself very well to just exponentially take over. And that's the thing with
I want to add something. I want to add something. I thought of a solution. I think it's grazing. You said a more economical approach. Yeah. I think it's a year process. It's not going to be, the first 5 years. It's going to take, maybe 5 years, but I think it's a type of livestock. So I think instead of cow, it's going to be a sheep type.
We cannot do that.
Why?
Because we are locked into a grazing license, a long-term grazing license with our cattle grazers. We cannot introduce another grazer or another license while we are locked in with this grazing license with who we have. So we are restricted to being able to do that.
Yeah. So Kelvin, you're absolutely correct. Like sheep would definitely be a solution here, because first of all, they're going to select a different diet than cattle will. They're going to be more targeted, but they're also herdable, right? So so you can haul water to them. You can put out electric fence. You can really target graze. Like if you grazed sheep in these areas, like 1 or 2 years, you could probably have the Medusa head issue gone. The problem with that is that it comes back to all of these things that make this a fun game, right? So they are locked into a cattle grazing lease, so they can only have cattle out there. And
it's not just that we can only have cattle out there, we can only have cattle from within this association out there. So we are locked into this group that we have, and I believe it's for the next 17 years at this point. Beyond, outside of that association, we cannot allow other grazers out there. We cannot allow somebody else's cattle out there unless it comes from this association. Yeah. So that's a great idea, and it's definitely been thought of. Unfortunately, we're restricted to being able to do that.
Yeah. Cheyenne, you got your hand up.
I remember last semester when we were working on calculations and things, we had to take into account other grazing wildlife species.
Yeah.
On this plot of land, do we need to take into account of it anything as like such?
Yeah, we do. I would. We do get some deer out there. We are supposed to maintain enough residual dry matter for wildlife species, so it is a big waterfowl area, so we do get a lot of duck nesting in some of those fields, so we do need to keep that in mind. I wouldn't say that it's a huge consideration, but definitely a consideration.
Okay, thank you.
Julie, give us an idea on number of head of deer in the herds. Are we talking like 30 or are we talking like
No, we're
300?
talking we're talking like less than, from what I've seen, probably less than 10,
Okay,
but they are there. It is, it's kind of more of a, just they pass through, kind of stop along the way.
to the
It
alfalfa
doesn't-
fields.
Yeah, it doesn't actually get a ton of deer, and I think that's because it is a public use property. You have people out there every day, 24/7, with their dogs, with their boats, shooting, making noise. So I don't think deer's ever going to be a big issue, but we do have a lot of native bird species, so ducks, eagles, the curlews, that do nest out there. So I would say you need to consider more bird nesting habitat than big game habitat.
Okay, cool. I've got a whole lecture on bird nesting, wildlife type stuff. So that's awesome. Good question, Cheyenne. Other questions, guys?
What is the grazing period on this property?
So the season can run anywhere from April 1st to November 30th of each year. It's at my discretion as to when I actually allow those cattle to turn out and when they pull off. And that has a lot to do with, moisture on the ground. It is a swamp, so if it's wet out there, if we put cows out there too early, it's just going to become a giant mud hole. Typically, the last week in April is the earliest I'll let cows out, just because the ground hasn't dried out enough and the grass hasn't really picked up enough to put cattle on it. But they can be out there anywhere from mid-April, and I keep them out until mid-November.
During the winter time, are all the S fields swamped?
No. So in the wintertime, you will get some seasonal flooding in the low areas. But like I said, that property was set up to drain the water, so it'll be very shallow flooding. And then once it reaches a certain point, it'll just drain off. It'll hit those drainage ditches and run into a canal. So you get some very shallow kind of sheet flooding in some of the lower S areas, but for the most part, it drains.
Cool.
So is this an area where it has water all year long on it, or is there periods of dry up and they need to haul water out?
So the only area on the swamp that maintains water year round, or areas I should say, are the drainage canals. There's what we call the snake pond, which you see, I don't know if you've had that on one of those maps. It's in that, yeah, so lower S1 field, upper corner. The snake pond is right there in the corner of that map. That whole area is underwater. In the wintertime, if it's a wet year, it will be. And then from the S1 field between S3 and S1, there's actually another drainage canal right there. It's just much smaller. So that will maintain.
I'm sorry, Julie. I think you cut out when you your microphone just lost you when you leaned forward.
Hear me?
Yep.
Okay. So in the S1 field and the S3 field, on that fence line, there's actually a small drainage canal there as well. So the snake pond, so it goes out towards the road. Yeah.
It's a bitch to get a horse through in November. That I
Yes.
know.
It doesn't matter what time of year. So the snake pond is actually full year round because it is the tailwater from these hay fields across the fence line. So that tailwater from those fields fills the snake pond and then goes through this drainage canal to the east and drains out by the road into the big drainage canal. So that's one area where there's year-round water. And then the main drainage canals, there's year-round water. Everything else will dry up
So
midsummer. Yeah.
here's the canal. Here's the canal.
And we don't haul any water as far as drinking water for the livestock because we do have water troughs. And we have a well and a pump house that pumps water to all of those troughs. So we don't have to haul any water. The only issue or time that would be an issue would be late winter. If it's freezing really hard, we'll shut the water system down so we don't get a bunch of breaks. And then that would be the only time they would have to haul water aside from, pump failure or something else to require us to shut down our pump. We did have a fire. What was that, 3 years ago? There was a fire in town that shut all the power off.
Oh, yeah, Haney Mountain, 2018.
Yeah, so when that happened, we lost power, which we lost the ability to pump water. So we did lose water for the weekend because we were without power. So what we did in that case is we just opened all the gates and let the cattle get to those drainage canals in order to get water.
Yeah.
That was kind of
Yeah, so that's an important part too, Julie, is with the canals, each pasture is fenced off from the canal now. It didn't used to be that way, but it is now, which is a good thing. So the only, as far as the native water that cows have access to is just going to be here in the Snake Pond area. The rest of the pastures have water troughs in them.
Yeah, and even that Snake Pond area, realistically, that circle is only this very upper corner of the S1 field. It doesn't even go into those other fields.
Oh, really? Wow. It does
Really?
not
Yeah.
look like that.
So that map is kind of, that map makes it look like it's a lot bigger than it is. Really, that Snake Pond is just that upper S1 northwest corner.
Okay, so it's just like here.
It's not even that big. It's literally just the corner. It might show it better on a previous map where that map's a little funky.
Let me look.
You go to the first map of the property you had, like the very first.
Oh,
Yeah, okay.
yeah.
So you see it right there
Yep.
in this map. It's just the corner is the pond.
That's a difference.
Yeah.
And that was a free map. That was Google Earth.
Yep, I know.
So interesting.
So our biggest limitation out here as far as increasing AUMs, so we would love to do a bunch of seeding out there. However, we don't have the ability to irrigate anything right now. We don't have any water rights as far as any of this drainage canal water goes or the water to the west coming from Tule River. We have no water rights to that. And we do not have any sort of ag well in place at this time. So our biggest limitation is water availability for irrigation.
Yeah.
We rely 100% right now on rain.
Yep. But as far as cattle water, to get to Cheyenne, back to Cheyenne's question that I know that she was going to ask, these are the water troughs and their location in each pasture.
Yeah.
So, and this is, gets into some management issues too, right? So this is a big pasture, but it's not the biggest one. This is the biggest one, right? This is the 700 acre one.
Yep.
Yep. And so 700 acres, and we've got one water trough here and the little pond here. And so these are things that we're going to talk about as we go through, and with the management plan is like, cows aren't going to get too far away from this water if they don't have to. So they're going to graze this area heavy around it before they head out over into these areas. So we can see super uneven grazing distribution in some situations just because of where the water's located.
So I do want to add, this year we are putting in 5 new water troughs. We are putting in 1 new trough in S2, putting in 1 new trough in S4. We're putting 1 new trough in N3 and 2 new troughs in N4. So those water troughs that are out there are only, I don't know, 5 foot across. So they're very small.
Yeah.
We're putting in, they're huge. They're basically a pool. And these troughs, with the plan that we will be able to cross fence these fields, specifically the N3 and N4 fields, because when we're at a good year, we can't keep cattle to keep that feed down. And basically we're losing utilization because they're not utilizing that feed at a fast enough rate.
Yeah.
So if we cross fence those off, we can stick them on one side, have them graze it down, move them back to another side. Just kind of manage those a little bit better. With the S4 and S2 fields, we're adding troughs more towards the middle left of the field to try to help with that cattle distribution across those fields.
Like over here?
Yeah.
Okay.
And then we have also put in additional pipeline and valves for future troughs if we decide to cross fence those fields in the future. They're already plumbed. We just have to put the troughs in afterwards.
I was just looking, do you think I have the map of where the new troughs are gonna go in at?
I think so that map you saw with potential trough sites.
Okay, so it's in
Some
here. I
of
just
those
gotta
are-
find it.
Yeah, some of those should actually be the 5 new troughs.
Okay,
May I ask a question while I'm looking at this?
yeah,
I was wondering if you guys use like any mowing or maybe like pesticides at the time of the Medusa head seeding to eliminate it. And like if you did, if you did it like one section mow, one section herbicide, and then you saw which one did better. I don't know.
So we haven't done that yet. I did do a little demonstration project this spring where we burned an area that was really heavy with Medusa head. And then we're gonna go back and spray versus not spray and see how that worked as far as managing it. We haven't done any mowing out there, and we haven't done any targeted spraying for Medusa head while it's or before it goes to seed, because it's so widespread for one. And once I start mowing potential feed sources out there, I'm going to potentially get into some issues with grazing. So it's just, I got to be careful about how I do it.
what do you mean with potential issues with grazing? Like your board members are gonna be mad because you're taking away vegetation?
No, more of the grazers will be upset that I'm taking away vegetation. I've had this conversation with a couple of them, actually,
Okay,
that I would be taking away residual dry matter for fall feed.
yeah, all that stuff is important. It all goes into how you manage land and the difficulty of it. I was
Yeah.
trying to find our fire videos.
So our demonstration project that we did is a very small section of the swamp. It's an area that doesn't really get any grazing on it just because there's not much grazing availability there. It's right by the access road. So we did a little demonstration project there where we just burned. It was really heavy in Medusa head and star thistle. And we'll see next spring after we burned and sprayed it. I can tell you right now, we haven't had really any Medusa head come back, but we have had a lot of star thistle come back.
Really?
Yeah.
So here's, if this will play, this is. Yeah, this was 10 acres, is that right?
Yeah, I think it was just under 10. It was about probably 8 acres.
There's Julie. Setting shit on fire. Julie's also a member of the volunteer fire department. So I'm a big proponent of like, that's the wave of the future. If we're going to manage stuff with fire, is the volunteers are going to have to get involved. And the good news about it is they own a lot of private property. So, but this is kind of what it looked like afterwards. So this is a really good, like low intensity fire, guys. So this is what we're talking about, that is just going to slowly spread. And you can see that there's green stuff coming up underneath it. And so it was really only burning the dry matter that was the previous year's growth. It was cool. There was just enough of a breeze to carry the fire that day. So I like fire. Sorry.
So they weren't happy that you were doing this right here, like the grazers?
I actually didn't get any feedback from them on that. So we were held by our agreement when we took this property that we were going to do specific things. The demonstration project was one of them. So we didn't really have a choice. We kind of had to do it. I decided to try to do it on Medusa Head to see, people always talk about burning Medusa Head in fire as a management tool. I wanted to see if that was something that we could use here, because herbicides, we just have way too much of it. It would cost more than we have. So I wanted to try to use a combination of fire with herbicide with grazing.
Yeah, I think that's great. Yeah,
we
I was just wondering
actually-
because you had said that they weren't happy.
I didn't get any feedback as far as the fire went, but I do know that I had made some comments to some grazers at some point about, why don't we try to mow this stuff? And the thing about the Medusa Head is it's going to be kind of a monoculture in some areas, but in other areas, it's going to be growing in among your other feed, your other annual feed. So you're kind of going to need to take a section of the field and just mow everything down. And by doing that, you're going to mow some of your other grasses as well. And when I was talking to somebody about it, they just mentioned, well, you're going to take away our fall feed if you do that. And he's completely correct. The pollution.
Yeah.
It would take away fall feed. It's just, will we get more of a benefit by doing it than we will by not doing it, is kind of what it comes down to. So that's where you have to kind of, I hate to say it, but almost play politics a little bit.
Yeah. Okay, really quickly, because I'm thinking of all of these types of situations. So oh crap, that question left me. I'll ask the other question. Talk to these guys a little bit, Julie, if you would, about managing the cattle. So we know kind of on dates and off dates,
Right.
but you have 9 grazers, so 9 essentially different brands that are coming in. Do you commingle those cattle? Do you try to keep them separate? What's your flexibility there?
So as I said, these grazers have been out here for years. When the RCD took this property, we took on the grazers. They had their own manager when it was PG&E property, but when it transferred over to RCD property, the RCD wanted to have one of their employees manage it for the sake of the RCDs. Basically, they want somebody who's going to look out for the RCD manager, which is very fair. Not that the other people wouldn't, but on years like this year, you have to make hard decisions of, it's a very dry year. Do you let everybody out with full numbers, or do you try to help out the land and cut numbers back? So when you run into those kind of decisions, that's where they wanted an RCD employee to be the manager. So when I took that role, the association, so this is where it gets a little convoluted. So if you guys get confused, don't be afraid to say something. The RCD got a chunk of the swamp property, but PG&E maintained part of the swamp property. These grazers work between the RCD property as well as PG&E property, and they graze both properties throughout the season. I manage the cattle on the RCD property. PG&E has somebody who manages the cattle on their property. So the fellow that manages the cattle on PG&E property is the person who managed the cattle when PG&E owned it all together. So when I took, sorry, just ignore that. When I took this role, I basically maintained the same methods that the guy used to see how that worked out. And then after being here for a couple of years, I've made some slight adjustments. So, but the way that they always did it is they have guys that come out with cows and calves, spring calves and fall calves. They have yearling steers come out, and then they also have a mixture of, you know, some dry cows, heifers. So you get the yearlings that would kind of stick on one side of the swamp by themselves. The guys that had cow calves coming out, the spring calvers would kind of stick together. The fall calvers would kind of stick together. And then you get a couple people that don't really want their cattle ran with anybody else, so they stay by themselves. But we typically try to run the cattle in probably 4 to 5 groups throughout the swamp. Try to keep the yearlings alone. And then obviously the yearlings are going to need a different type of feed because they're trying to put on a lot of weight a lot faster versus your heifers or your cows with calves, especially if they're spring calves versus fall calves. So you kind of run those cattle where the feed is. So you run the yearlings where the spring feed is in the spring, because that's going to have, you know, the better sugar content, better protein, supposed to help them gain faster. And then the cows typically run to the area of the swamp. More of the perennial feed, dry feed. Does that answer?
Julie, how hard would it be? Could you send us maybe just a breakdown of, you know, either this year or, you know, if you've got records from previous years of what cow types, I don't need to know brands or want to know brands, but kind of what cattle type was in wet pasture for how long?
Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah, I can
that would be really helpful, I think. So, and then when you say manage, so you manage the RCD pastures, what does management look like for you? Are you managing health or water or cattle movement?
So I determine when the cattle go out, what fields they go to, how long they stay in those fields, when they move, and where they move. I determine the number of cattle for the year. I'm responsible for the fencing, the water. The grazers have their own people who do the health checks on their cattle. And then the grazers are also responsible for supplementing their own mineral salt, because they all want to do something a little different. And then the fellow that manages the area is in charge of moving the cattle. So I notify him when I'm ready for them to move and where I want them to go, and then they come and they move the cattle. Although a lot of the times I do it because it's just realistically open a gate and
And then like cattle type breed-ish. I mean, we aren't dealing with a bunch of eared cattle, right?
Bunch of what?
Eared cattle, like Brahmin influence cattle.
No, I think primarily they're all Angus. I want to say, or Angus and something.
Yeah,
Um,
Angus based.
yeah,
And
I
Charolais.
don't. Yeah, you get some Charolais out there, but for the most part, I'm pretty sure they're mostly either Angus or something with Angus.
Okay.
But
So-
no Brahmins, no. Yeah, no special breeds of cattle out there. They might have some Brahma influence, maybe, but
Yeah, I think, I almost think Bill Crum, when he had he was an operator there, he was probably the last one to kind of run some eared cattle. He had beef masters, but
Yeah.
I think Tim Brown has his permit now, so.
I don't know. There might be some. I don't even think there's even really any beef master out there. Primarily, most of the cattle, kind of hard to say because you get some red cows, you get some black cows, you get some that obviously look Charolais, you get some that look a little short horny, like Hims,
Yeah,
but it's hard to. And then those yearling steers could be anything because they're just been being fed out until they're gone. So
yeah. Cool.
And I've never actually asked exactly what they have out there, but I think your cow-calf guys mostly have some sort of Angus influence.
No, I've learned to ask that question because Brahmin influenced cattle graze very differently than, not very differently, slightly differently than Bos Indicus or Bos Taurus cattle. So yeah, so we had to make some different considerations when we were in New Mexico if we had Brahmins grazing. So
I could ask. I don't know. Some of them would tell me outright, but I don't know. I could see a couple of them not wanting to tell me what they have.
it's okay. It's okay. I think we're okay. Awesome. Okay, I'm sure we will have some more questions. So we might, as they come up, I might send you an email here or there. And then, yeah, I think we'll see what your schedule's like during finals week and maybe we'll pull together some presentations for you. How about that?
Okay. Yeah. I'm just trying to think if there's anything.
Really quick question.
Yeah.
Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Raylene.
So I know that you were trying out controlled burns. Did you also try out like reseeding with a native or naturalized species that's really competitive and vigorous to try and drown out the Medusa head afterwards?
We have not. So we tried seeding an area of the swamp, not to combat Medusa head, just because we wanted to try some dryland seed mix out there to see how it would do. And then unfortunately, we didn't get any rainfall. So we would love to try doing some seeding. But as I said, we are completely reliant on rain. And so with it being as dry of a year as it is, we haven't even touched seeding because we have no way to irrigate it or make sure that those seeds actually are able to germinate because we are entirely dependent on rain. And in this area, everybody that I've spoken to, seed guys, farm advisors for Shasta County, everybody says that you want to seed in fall, which is September. Well, we still have not had any rain from September to now. So all of those guys who have seeded, they can irrigate. I mean, if they're seeding for, pasture or whatever, but for us, it's kind of a gamble. Do you put some seed in and hope you get some rain, or do you do what we did and we seeded and we never got any rain and all of that seed went to waste?
Yeah, and it's totally dependent on species too. So like the native grass or the naturalized grass species, they have wussy DNA, like, and that's a technical term, right? Because it's not like wheat or barley that we put in and plant in the fall so that it comes up in the spring and the summer. Those species have been, or have evolved over time to have a really, really hard shell that can protect the DNA, even in freezing and that type of thing. But grass seed is a little bit more fickle. So, but that was a good question, really.
It's definitely a really great idea, and it's something we've thought about, but until we get some sort of irrigation method, or we drill a well where we know we have the water so that when we put the seed in the ground, we can guarantee it's going to get some sort of water. It's just a little too risky to put that much time and effort in, especially when you're working with a really limited budget.
Yep. Awesome. Cool. Any other questions, guys? I don't want to take up Julie's entire afternoon.
I'm getting a bunch of phone calls. Like everybody knows I'm in a meeting.
Awesome. Well, Julie, this really helps get us started. Thank you so much for letting us use the swamp property as a case study, and hopefully we're going to come up with some solutions for you.
Yeah, and I don't know what you guys are allowed to do with COVID in school, but outside of school, I guess,
yeah.
you guys want to come up and actually look at the property, I'm all for it. So
awesome.
It's here, it's not going anywhere. So you're more than welcome.
All right. Well, thank you so much. Yeah, and this was great. So we're gonna strategize. We'll let you get on with your day, and we're gonna strategize. So thank you so much for being here. We appreciate it, and I'll be in touch. I'm sure we're gonna have more questions come up. So
okay, yeah, no problem. Thanks for having me. Good.
Yeah.
Casey, shoot me any questions you guys have. Give me maybe a few days to get back with you guys. This is the time of the year where things start wrapping up and cattle start coming off, and I got to start doing the billing and stuff. So
awesome.
Just try not to leave me with any last minute questions, because there's no guarantee I can get back to you guys in time. So
no, that's okay. I think if you get the chance and can send us the weights from the samples that you collected, that would help. And then kind of grazing history on the pastures.
Okay. Yeah.
Awesome. That's the two things we need.
Okay. I will try to get that to you hopefully by next week.
Okay. Awesome. Thanks, Julie. Appreciate it.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Awesome. All right, crew. What do you think?
Just make sure to pick up because mommy might get home soon.
Is her, oh, sorry. Liz, are you saying something?
Oh, I don't know.
I'm not sure. I think maybe.
My bad,
no.
my bad, my bad.
It's okay.
Is her main goal? I was trying to the whole time I was trying to get the main goal, right? And I didn't want to ask because I didn't want to seem like I wasn't getting it. But is the main goal to reduce the invasive species and increase the carrying capacity in the amount of native vegetation? Is that the whole main goal? I'm trying to get the main goal.
Yep, that is the whole main goal. Here's the really good news about that. If we can get Medusa head to decrease and get something else that can be grazed to increase, we will automatically increase animal units.
Okay.
Because right now Medusa head isn't desirable. The cattle can only graze it after it's dead. It really isn't providing a ton of AUMs right now.
Would you say the Medusa head is a bigger problem than, say, the cheatgrass or that goat? I can't even think of some of the other names, but there's other names on there. You'd say that's the number one.
Yeah. So barbed goat grass, if that moves in and takes over, we would have a different discussion. Right now it's only in a couple of the pastures. It's not very prevalent, thank goodness. cheatgrass is, sorry, let me yell at a dog. Stupid dogs. Bubba! Come here. Come on, Mace, get down the road. Dogs think they're protecting everybody and they're not. Cheatgrass is a problem because it's an annual, but we're used to a system with annual grasses in it. And cattle will eat cheatgrass. So to me, it's way less of a problem, and it actually will contribute to AUMs compared to Medusa head.
Okay.
So cool.
Can you get, so you literally, like you said, you can't get cattle to graze Medusa head until it is dead, dried up matter.
We're gonna take a deeper look at it. In general, Julie's pretty convinced that we can't really, that the cattle aren't really grazing it well. But there is some research out there that says it could be grazed between this time and this time, and it should be killed or sprayed or mowed or fire between this time and this time. And we know we can graze it when it's dead. So as residual dry matter, like right now. So we're gonna look into that a little bit more intensely. So as you guys are reading through the Medusa head management guide stuff, think about some of the conversations that she has had. So, so now that we have kind of a full proposal, I need to kind of step back and strategize from a teaching standpoint, the best way for us to kind of move forward with this. But I would be interested to hear from you guys, like, you know, does this sound like, I mean, we're going to do a lot of stuff as a class together. We're going to step through different aspects of management, you know, so we'll talk about, you know, we'll have Josh Davey come in hopefully and tell us a little bit about his research with spraying herbicide for Medusa head, managing Medusa head with grazing. We'll look at some of the soil ecology stuff, but I'm really envisioning like 4 or 5 proposals at the end of this to send to Julie. And so I'm just curious, I don't know, do you guys think that is an individual assignment or a group assignment at this point? What do you think?
I feel like it's group.
Okay, one vote for group.
Group project.
I think group project would be good.
Okay.
Multiple ideas kind of contributing together.
Okay. Yeah.
Not
Go ahead, Alex.
this isn't about the group or the individual part, but I feel like it's the management plan as a whole is going to be harder for this situation because it seems like there's too many like players and too many grazers and too many fingers in the whole deal, kind of. So like have a more organized grazing or something. Or yeah.
Yep. Yeah. So if in a perfect world, I absolutely would state that. But again, this is one of those properties that, I mean, it's my goal to give you guys as much reality as possible, right? And this is a real life situation that happens not just here, but all over the West. So we're gonna try to work within the confines of stuff because you really can't just walk away and quit a job. So yeah, but you would absolutely be right. You know, in a perfect world, we'd probably bring in sheep. We would probably do some no cost tilling, that type of thing. But we don't have unlimited money or the ability to get rid of some of those easements that are already in place. So
what did RC stand for? She said she works for RC, but I don't know if she ever stated what it stands for.
So she works for the Fall River Resource Conservation District.
Okay.
So RCD is what we call them. And they are a non-government organization, essentially. So they, remember our conversation at the beginning of the semester about, everybody moved west with the gold rush, and they stuck claim to all the really desirable land that had water and good grazing and that type of thing. And then BLM and Forest Service got what was left over. That's kind of the situation, that the modern day situation that we're running into. So when big landowners like PG&E need to transition out because they are getting sued and have to file bankruptcy, one of the ways that they split their assets is by transitioning this to these type of districts, and they're transitioning ownership to those types of districts. So we end up with chunks of land that nobody really wants, but is really essential to small towns, ecosystems, irrigation systems, infrastructure, those type of things. And so that's where RCDs really step up and take over with management.
You were asking her how, like, I think you asked her, how many cows she presently and in the past has ran on each cross section, or did she answer that, or did she say she would get back to you?
She's going to send us like number of head and in dates and out dates and that type of thing. So the reason that I know a lot about this property is my uncle and his former business partner have been grazing this land since like the 50s. And so I was a little kid. That's where I learned to ride a horse, was out there many hours with a dead butt in a saddle. And so he will typically send out about 225 head of mama cows, and that is enough so that he doesn't run with other producers. So in some of these pastures, like especially the big pasture, she's having to pull together, 2 or 3 different brands of cattle just to get numbers up in that pasture. So it just kind of depends. And so she doesn't have a ton of flexibility with grazing numbers because of the requests of the ranchers. So some of them want to run by themselves. Some of them want to run yearlings. You really can't run yearlings and cows together. Let's also add to that the facilities suck ass. And so there's not really a good set of corrals out there. There will be in the future, but not right now. So I remember as a little kid being out there trying to sort yearlings out of the cows. And our corrals was 8 pickups and trailers parked in a square. So, there's all kinds of complications that come with this type of thing. So it's a lot to take in. And that's the fun part, is like, we can go to the research and look and see what's out there, and then we can try to fit it in some aspect to this type of property. So it's fun. So it's going to be an evolving mess. So if you guys like straightforward type things, the next couple of months are going to be hard, but it's going to be fun. So I kind of like the idea of some group projects. So I'll think about how that works. I'm going to kind of think through all of this. I'll write up an official assignment, kind of get some strategy in place. And then I am out of town the next week and a half, guys. So I'm at animal science meetings. So we're not going to meet at all for lecture or lab next week. Okay, so just make a note of that. I'll put that in the email as well. You will have material to work through as far as lecture material next week that will be due on the 22nd. But we're gonna plan on meeting Monday the 25th at 10, and I will have kind of an assignment for this management plan pulled together. So I'm gonna try to bring in some guest speakers. We're gonna read some papers together, that type of thing. So this is gonna be fun. I'm excited. So, okay, questions?
How are we going to, are we just going to use what kind of data she has as far as current vegetation states? Like in a regular one, we'd go out and we'd cut vegetation to see how much dry matter we have.
Yep.
But based on her running this property for so long, she knows how many cows are on there, so she doesn't really have to do that often.
So you ask a complicated question, Tessa.
Sorry.
So there's the way it's been done and there's the way it should be done, and we're somewhere in the middle. So she has vegetation weights from ring clippings for the last couple of years. So so she's collected them in the spring and she collects them in the fall. So we're going to take the mean between those two and run with that as our average. And so as we move into calculating stocking rate, that might be what is in lecture next week, is like bringing everybody up to speed on how to calculate stocking rate. We'll go through as a class and calculate stocking rate for these pastures. And so we'll extrapolate that out. So we'll take what's produced in the ring on average, go to an acre, go to, the entire pasture. And that's how we will calculate carrying capacity that way.
Okay, I just didn't know if she had current one, but now that's good to know that she does have current ring measurements.
Yep. And I'm excited for her. I'm helping her kind of get a monitoring plan in place. So that's why she's putting exclosures and stuff in, because we're going to be able to add another layer to this, hopefully next year, of like, okay, we'll take clippings from outside the cages that looks pretty similar to, inside the cages as far as species composition, but has been grazed, right? And then we'll take samples from inside the exclosure and take the difference between those, and we can know how much the cows are actually eating. And so in some pastures, like that Reed Canary pasture, they're probably going to eat a lot of it. But in the Medusa head pasture, I bet that those differences aren't very different at all. And so yeah, it's just an interesting piece of property. I mean, whoever would have thought that a former swamp would be, cattle grazing mecca, right? So, and she's always game for like tours and that type of thing. And I am definitely not opposed to that. We just can't do anything officially since we're online. But if some of you guys wanted to road trip for a day and wanted to go walk through, what that looks like and that type of thing, we can absolutely talk about that. So it's going to be friends meeting and talking about rangeland, and it's not going to be anything to do with ANSC 394 is officially what's going to happen. But I know you guys are busy and we're walking into the end of the semester. So I've got a bunch of pictures. I just need to put it together, and I'll take some video and stuff when I get out there. So cool. Okay. I'm excited. I will get my head together and try to figure out the best way to teach this. That's always the challenge, but it's also real life. So I hope you guys enjoy it as much as I do. So cool. All right. I don't want to hold you any longer. Thanks for hanging out, and thanks for being a good audience for Julie. I'll stick around, answer any questions you guys may have, or if you want to talk about other stuff, great. If not, I will see you the 25th, I think, so is the next day I'll see you. So don't come to lab next week. I won't be there.
Could I throw like a hypothetical management plan towards you? Because I'm
Sure.
pretty sure it's not possible for this patch of land, but I wanted to throw it out anyway just to see if it is or not. So the areas that are affected, those were part of swampland too, right? It wasn't just the lower elevation areas.
Yep.
Can you drown out Medusa head by putting water on the land while it's trying to germinate? Because if it's originally swampland and it does have the lake there, so the water's not like totally dried out, is it possible to flood some of those highly affected pasture areas when the Medusa head's trying to germinate? And then, draw down the water, whether it's quick or slow drawdown, I don't know what would work better, but draw it down after that period has passed to allow other vegetation to grow, but to hopefully like bypass Medusa head sprouting.
I don't know. That's a really great question. And I know that Ducks Unlimited has a grant for some of those pastures that we're going to be calculating stocking rate for that have pretty bad infestation, and flooding part of those pastures was part of that. So I'm going to make a note. Keep that in mind, and let's see if we can find some literature about flooding areas to knock out Medusa head.
Yeah, because I'm in the waterfowl biology class, and we do talk about land management. It's focusing more on waterfowl, of course, but you can alter vegetation based on how you do drawdowns and flooding, whether it's year round or like parts of the year. There's a lot that could be done using water to affect the area. And I do know that she was saying like waterfowl are really big there. Like it's a big waterfowl area. So there may be some sort of crossover of land management for waterfowl that can also benefit like the cattle by trying to knock down that Medusa head.
Yeah. I love it.
Just a thought. I don't know if it's too expensive, because I know water is it's a really touchy subject in a lot of places, but
it is. But I think like novel, unique approaches like that are stuff that we need to talk about. And so I love that you're in the waterfowl class. That's awesome. We're going to lean on you a lot, because that's a really big piece of public access for this property is people take boats out there. I learned to duck hunt out there, in really, really cold winters on boats, which was stupid. And so, yeah, waterfowl is a big piece of that. And there's some nesting sites and in the cattle pastures and stuff. So all fun stuff. Yeah.
Okay. Cause like, I was just thinking like, this was once a swamp. It's only been, 100 years since it's been drained out, which I mean, it's a long time, but the land is still fit for flooding like that again. If, if we try and like lean it in that direction, and part of it is restoring it closer to what it was before, but not full restoration.
Right.
So it's like, oh, if you kind of alter the land so it's a little closer to how it used to be, maybe it'll kill out or drive out some of the invasive plant species and help bring back some of the native stuff. And I don't know, just a thought.
I love it. I love it. Yeah, keep that one in mind, okay?
Nice. All right.
Excellent. Any other thoughts, guys?
Head out.
Thanks, Raylene.
Question.
Yeah.
In relation with the presentation too. So I saw on.
Oh, sorry, you're muted again.
There we go. You can hear me now?
Yep.
Okay, so I saw in a couple of fields that there was vernal pools in the area. Would that affect how we are able to manage that area too? Because
Great question.
Like some more endangered species in those areas.
Yeah, the fairy shrimp.
Yeah, and I think the vernal pools, they were pretty popular in one of the sections where it contained a lot of Medusa head, I believe, if I remember correctly. So would that be like a thing to look into more so?
Yeah, I think we should look into that. So kind of vernal pool ecology on Medusa head growth. I'm making notes, sorry, that wasn't necessarily a question directed at you, but that's a really important point. Because I don't believe they have any mitigation easements on vernal pools, which is a good thing for this piece of property as far as management, because that would be another layer of stuff we would have to kind of manage around too. So that's great. So note that one down, Tommy. I've got it written down too. I think that's something we need to look into.
Okay.
Sweet. That's why I love these projects. I learn as much as you guys do. So figuring it out. Awesome. Any other comments, ideas, questions?
What kind of public access, minus like you said, they can go in on boats and like duck hunt? Is there any other kind of public access to those lands? Or no?
Those are the big ones. So they're because it is pretty or they have a lot of birds. Birding is starting to become popular, and I have a whole solution for Julie about that one. So like I can't remember if I told you guys or not, but like bird species diversity, if you have a large diversity, that's actually a sign of a really well managed piece of rangeland compared to a small diversity. And so the waterfowl species are, I don't know what is diverse and what is not in context, and maybe Raylene can speak into that a little bit, but birding is definitely starting to become more popular because we're not only seeing our waterfowl species, we're seeing a lot of other bird species that are pretty novel start to show up in these areas as well. So I actually proposed to Julie to work with a birding club to come in once a year and spend a weekend birding. And, you know, they have all their little fun birding apps, and they can put in how many they see of this type and what they hear and that type of thing. And that would actually create an inventory for her for part of her monitoring plan. So yeah, so birding is becoming a little more popular, but it's mostly duck hunting and geese hunting.
Yeah, I'm not sure what the exact threshold is for, you know, high and low diversity when it comes to that, but no, it is true with you know, a higher diversity of birds is a good sign of a pretty healthy, at least water system, because you'll have everything growing on that wetland that's looking good.
Yeah.
Cool.
Cool.
But that's a good idea too.
Yeah. Lots of good ideas. Awesome. Kelvin, I loved your idea about sheep. I wish we could do it there because that would solve the problem fast, but we can't. Such a bummer.
So I know we talked about the grazing permits and leases and things like that, but that was more for federal owned land. How does one get around to locking themselves into like 17 more years of being able to graze on this property?
So it was so it was originally 20. So the RCD was given the land with the last PG&E bankruptcy. So that was in 2018. And so RCD thankfully didn't really want to rock the boat as far as like coming up with a new grazing plan, etc., because they need revenue off of this piece of land. So these ranchers are paying, you know, however much per AUM, and I don't know what that is. We could ask, but I don't really feel comfortable asking. And so they just kept it with that was a contingency of the land going from PG&E to RCD, was that the grazing management wouldn't change. So it was the same ranchers that had ran out there for years. And so that was a 20-year contract because they didn't want to lock themselves into like, you know, 100-year lease or something like that. And so we've seen the numbers of operators dwindle over the years, but the total number of cattle have not. So there's 9, we'll call them permittees. There's 9 ranchers, 9 different brands that run on that property. And they, as long as they pay their bill and don't piss off the other board members, they get to stay. So. Awesome. You guys asked really great questions. Thanks for being such a good audience. Yeah, I'll hang out as long as I need to, but if you guys want to just hang out or jump off, that totally works too.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Thanks, Tommy.
I just had a quick question about 490.
Okay.
Did we have any assignments this week, like lecture videos or something we had to read? Because on Blackboard, it's just the briefing and then the video you posted for methods and materials.
I kind of don't think so. I can't remember though. All my classes are running together because I'm trying to get all the material up for Friday because I leave tomorrow. So 490.
Luke, what is your guys' project on this semester?
This semester, it's on composting livestock mortalities.
Oh, that's
bone in
exciting.
offal and then bone out offal, and they're actually doing the experiment on the farm right now.
Oh,
Yeah,
that's
it's
awesome.
awesome. So I think I
Yeah,
talked
that's a
about
really good
that
one.
in your class, Cheyenne, but we didn't get it off the ground in time.
Yeah, that sounds really cool.
Yep. Oh, yeah. So no assignments or quiz due this week, Luke.
Okay, thank you.
You bet. You bet.
I just had a personal matter.